2002, 90 years of trust, prestige, and then one indictment, and the whole empire collapsed. 85,000 jobs lost in the blink of an eye. But why? Because the system needed a scapegoat. 85,000 people lost their jobs. Investors lost everything. The government got its scalp. 3 years later, the Supreme Court looked at the case and said, actually, the jury instructions were too broad. Most of those employees were just following document policy. No criminal intent. But the firm was already dead. You can't unconvict a corpse. Why did it happen? Because the system needed a chicken to scare the monkeys. Enron was burning. Congress was sharpening its knives. The Justice Department needed a win, and it needed it now. Andersen wasn't destroyed because it deserved to die. It was destroyed because it was the right size, the right shape, and the right distance from the core. You've seen this movie. The compliance incident that lands on a data entry clerk, not the VP who signed off. The SEC press release naming a dozen junior traders, while the guy who designed the toxic product gets his bonus and a new title. Your colleague getting roasted company-wide for a CC list mistake, while the bosses who cultivated that communication culture just quietly revoke his channel access. This isn't coincidence. This is the system's pre-programmed deterrence routine. It doesn't ask, who caused this? It asks, who can we sacrifice to make the problem look solved? On this assembly line, 3 types get selected more often than others. Type 1, the gray hero. You're the fixer, the one who bypasses the rulebook when the rulebook is broken. You launch first, file later. You calm the client with a verbal promise. You steal headcount from another project because that's the only way to hit the deadline. Everyone knows you're doing the right thing. No one audits your methods. Then the crisis hits. The investigators find your 3-year-old unarchived contract mod, your 2-year-old I'll take the heat email, your 1-year-old vendor payment with no competitive bid. None of this caused the crisis, but it's clean, documented, undeniable. You didn't cause the fire. You just left a perfect paper trail of kindling. Volkswagen did this. A few mid-level engineers took the plea deals. The board members who approved the diesel strategy never saw a courtroom. But here's the kicker. The engineers were punished because they were the visible targets. The system needed them as a scapegoat. What if you were one of them? What would you do next? Your problem-solving history just became your liability portfolio, and the system just decided to cash it in. Type 2, the innocent neighbor. You had nothing to do with the incident. Maybe you weren't even in the same building. But the data breach happened in your business unit, and you're the ops supervisor who transferred in 3 months ago. Policy says managerial responsibility for risk events. You didn't cause the leak. Your name is on the notification. Your file now has a quiet, invisible flag involved in Incident X. It won't appear in any public statement, but it will appear silently at every promotion review for the rest of your career. You paid the interest on someone else's liability. No receipt, no refund. Type 3. The minor transgressor. You made a real mistake. Small. A report 2 days late. An emergency action without the sign-off. A loosely phrased email. In normal times, this gets you a verbal reminder and maybe a coffee chat. These are not normal times. You get a written warning. Your bonus is cut. Your annual rating drops. You are the inaugural passenger on the Zero Tolerance Express. The system is drawing a new red line, and it's using your minor error to paint it solid. Congratulations, you're not being punished for what you did, you're being punished for what the system needs to say. So how does the system decide who goes on the altar? It runs a calculation. 4 variables. It never shows you the math, but the math is always running. 1, deterrence value. How visible is this person? How easy is it to tell their story in one punchy sentence? The classic title got picked because he put a coat on the king is a better story than the coat guy wasn't there. If your mistake is narratively clean, you're high on the list. 2, justice cost. What happens if we sanction this person and it turns out they were mostly innocent? Will the team riot? Will the client leave? Is this person connected, protected, embedded? The system doesn't care how aggrieved you feel. It cares how much your grievance will cost. 3, proof difficulty. How hard is it to find the real culprit? How many meetings, how many experts, how many uncomfortable questions? Truth is expensive. A plausible narrative is cheap. The system buys cheap. 4, rule clarity gain. Does punishing this person send a message about where the new boundary is? A borderline case is the best case for drawing a line. Sacrifice someone whose error was not quite that bad, and everyone suddenly knows exactly where that bad begins. The formula, priority equals deterrence, clarity, / justice, proof. Sounds simple, right? But what happens when the system doesn't just want to punish, when it wants to send a message loud and clear? That's the part where the real consequences begin. If the number is high, you're selected. Not because you're guilty, because you're optimal. Here's the ancient insight, stripped of the classical furniture. A man added a coat to his cold king. It was a good deed. He was punished. Not because the king was ungrateful, because the harm of a broken boundary exceeded the harm of the cold. The king knew the man was innocent of bad intent. He sanctioned him anyway. Why? Because the system needed the boundary, not the deed. The man was not selected because he was guilty. He was selected because he was flawed. He'd taken one small step outside his lane. That flaw made him usable. A perfectly innocent man can't be sacrificed. The backlash would be too high. But a man who is 95% innocent, 5% overstepping, perfect specimen. This is the machine. It never sacrifices the completely blameless. It sacrifices people who have something on their record, something that can be pointed to, written up, condensed into a cautionary tale. Your tiny flaw is not your vulnerability, it's your qualification. And when the system really needs to lock things down, it doesn't just punish the doer, it punishes the neighbors. You can be sanctioned for what your colleague did, not because it's fair. Because if you might be punished for his mistakes, you'll start policing him for free. The system just created 1,000 unpaid compliance officers. You're one of them. So what do you actually do? First, lower your deterrence value. Avoid mistakes that are visually clean, narratively simple, easy to turn into a slide. The classic title got picked because putting a coat on the king is a movie scene. Your boring, complicated, hard to summarize error is much safer. Second, raise your justice cost. Not by being difficult, by being expensive to lose. Document your tacit knowledge. Make yourself the only person who understands the legacy system. Build client relationships that don't have a backup. You don't need to be irreplaceable. You just need to be expensive enough to make them hesitate. Third, annotate your flaws. You can't erase the time you bypass procurement, but you can make sure the file also says, verbal authorization obtained, subsequent compliance review completed, no recurrence. The system's deterrence algorithm scans for blemishes. You can control how much context is attached to yours. And one immediate exercise, the deterrence archive audit. Look at the last 12 months. Find any instance where you did something that belonged to someone else's job, skipped a formal step to meet a deadline, knew about a procedural gap, and didn't report it. Now ask, if this was exhumed tomorrow, what's my narrative correction? The urgency, the verbal nod, the post facto fix? This isn't about guilt, it's about owning the interpretation. The system will never stop needing sacrificial specimens. Deterrence is a budget item, and budgets need to be spent, but you can stop being the optimal expenditure. Which brings us to the next layer. If the system is willing to kill the innocent to maintain deterrence, what does it do when deterrence starts to fail? When people are no longer scared enough, it doesn't try harder to scare them. It makes sure they literally cannot act. Approval chains, control nodes, sign-offs stacked on sign-offs. When dare not breaks, the system switches to cannot. That's the mechanism we'll open next time. L3-52, why approval chains suddenly get longer. Because when the system stops trusting you to obey, it starts trusting only the handcuffs.